Ever notice how some people just seem to get the whole status thing? Like they were born knowing how to work a room or climb the ladder. Today, we're diving deep into the psychology behind those social climbers and wallflowers. We're going to unpack why status matters, even if we don't want to admit it, and what your place in that game might be.
You've brought some really interesting research that suggests a lot of this is happening below the surface, right? It's not always a calculated power grab.
Exactly. It's like our brains are wired to care about status even if we don't consciously realize it. Like how we crave sugar. We know it's not always good for us, but something deep down says, go for it.
That's a great analogy because just like with our ancestors in survival, those who were respected and admired were more likely to get the resources they needed to survive.
So you're saying that even if I think I'm above caring about what other people think, my caveman brain might be whispering something else?
It's possible.
Yeah.
But remember, we're talking averages here, not destinies.
Yeah.
Some people are perfectly content with a smaller circle and a quieter life.
True. Not everyone over 6 feet is in the NBA, right? But speaking of being hardwired, there's this quote from the research you sent that really struck me. It talks about how even single-celled organisms, like amoebas, want nutrients even though they don't have a brain plotting their next meal.
I love that example. It highlights how ingrained these drives are. We can discuss human behavior-seeking status in intentional terms, even if it's often driven by unconscious mechanisms.
So that drive for status, that urge to secure our place in the world, it might be as primal as an amoeba searching for its next meal. That's wild when you think about it. But it also makes me wonder, does everyone experience this drive with the same intensity? Or are some of us just wired to be more ambitious?
That's where things get really interesting, because when we look at who actually gets ahead in the status game, intelligence plays a fascinating role. It's not as straightforward as you might think.
You mean it's not about being a straight-up genius?
Remember that psychologist Arthur Jensen? He defined intelligence as the ability to learn, to connect information, to apply knowledge in new situations. It's about those aha, not just memorizing facts.
It's not just about what you know, but how you use it.
When it comes to status and influence, there's actually a sweet spot. Research by psychologist Dean Simonton found that an IQ around 119 seems ideal for leadership.
Okay, I need you to unpack that one because it sounds counterintuitive. Wouldn't a higher IQ equal more success across the board?
You'd think so, right? But think about it this way. Someone with an extremely high IQ might be brilliant, but they might also struggle to relate to or connect with those who don't think exactly like them. And on the flip side, someone with average intelligence might not have the problem-solving skills or the ability to grasp complex concepts. So this sweet spot, this 119 IQ, seems to be the perfect balance.
So you're saying it's like finding a romantic partner. You want someone who challenges you intellectually but doesn't make you feel like you need subtitles to keep up.
You want a leader who is smart enough to understand complex issues, but relatable enough to connect with people from all walks of life.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about raw intelligence. It's about that ability to connect, to build bridges, to lead in a way that resonates. Now that we've established that there's more to status than just being a brainiac, let's throw another wrench into the works. What about our personalities? Don't those play a role too? You know what they say, opposites attract. So maybe finding that perfect balance in a partner or a leader isn't just about intelligence.
That's a great point. You're absolutely right. It's not just about brain power. Our personalities come into play too. And when we're talking about personality and status, it's impossible to ignore the big five: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and eroticism.
It's like personality bullet points. But some of these traits probably matter more than others when it comes to climbing that social ladder, right?
Some traits are definitely more status-friendly than others. For example, take extroversion. It's often mistaken for competence simply because extroverts tend to be more assertive and vocal.
Makes sense. The squeaky wheel gets the grease.
There's this fascinating study where researchers put a bunch of strangers in a room, and within minutes, a hierarchy emerged, based almost entirely on who spoke up the most.
So basically, the chattiest person in the room becomes the de facto leader, whether they have the skills to back it up or not. I've definitely been in a few meetings like that.
It happens all the time. And what's even more interesting is that agreeableness, which sounds like a good thing, can actually be a disadvantage when it comes to status, especially for men.
Being nice can hurt your chances of getting ahead. Tell me more.
Research shows that men who are highly agreeable tend to earn less over their lifetimes. They might be less likely to negotiate for higher salaries or promotions, getting along ahead of getting ahead.
So maybe there's some truth to that old saying, nice guys finish last. It makes you wonder how much of that is nature versus nurture.
It's a complex issue, for sure. This research highlights the importance of advocating for yourself, even if it feels a bit uncomfortable. Sometimes you have to be willing to ruffle a few feathers to get what you deserve.
I can see how that could be a tough balance to strike, especially for people who are naturally more agreeable. What about conscientiousness? Those super organized, detail-oriented folks, are they topping the status charts?
Conscientiousness is definitely a valuable trait, especially in certain fields. Think about careers like engineering or accounting, where accuracy and attention to detail are essential.
My meticulously crafted to-do lists are my superpower.
In those types of roles, conscientiousness is a strong predictor of success. But in more social or creative fields, it might not carry the same weight.
Being the most organized person at a party probably won't win you any popularity contests.
And while we're talking about traits that can be double-edged, let's touch on neuroticism, or emotional stability.
This is the part where we talk about those of us who overthink everything.
The research suggests that high neuroticism, or low emotional stability, can be a status killer, especially for men. There's often an expectation, particularly for men in leadership roles, to be even-keeled and emotionally resilient.
A high-strung guy is less likely to be taken seriously as a leader.
Women don't seem to experience some negative impact on their status from a bit of neuroticism.
So a woman can express a wider range of emotions without it hurting her standing. I guess we still have a ways to go in terms of gender expectations in the workplace.
And to wrap up our Big Five whirlwind tour, let's talk about openness, which is all about being curious, imaginative, and open to new experiences.
The impact of openness on status depends a lot on the context, right?
In fields that value creativity and innovation, like the arts or entrepreneurship, openness is a huge asset. But in more traditional or hierarchical environments, it might not be as appreciated.
Okay, so we've covered intelligence in the Big Five, but the research you sent me throws in another curveball with something called self-monitoring. And I have to say, this one really piqued my interest.
High self-monitors are like social chameleons. They're incredibly attuned to social cues and can adapt their behavior to fit in and impress. They walk into a room and just instinctively know how to act.
Like that scene in Catch Me If You Can, where Leonardo DiCaprio convinces everyone he's a pilot, then a doctor, then a lawyer, all because he's a master of reading people and playing the part.
DiCaprio's character in that film is a classic example of a high self-monitor. The research shows that this ability to adapt can be a huge advantage in terms of climbing the social ladder.
It's not always about what you know, but how well you play the game.
High self-monitors tend to be more successful in climbing the corporate ladder, even if it's not because they're inherently more skilled or deserving, which raises some interesting questions about authenticity and whether those who are genuinely themselves are at a disadvantage.
It's disheartening to think that someone who's really good at playing the game might get ahead of someone who's truly talented, but maybe not as socially adept.
It's something to ponder.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears and talk about a different set of personality traits often associated with ambition and status seeking, but not always in a positive light.
You're talking about the dark triad,
Yeah.
narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Time to get a little dark and twisty. Okay, so before we went away, it sounded like we were about to go down the rabbit hole of the dark triad.
Yeah.
For those just tuning in, we're talking about narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These traits get a bad rap, and for good reason.
Sure.
How dark are they really?
It's important to remember, we're talking about a spectrum here. It's not like you're either a saint or a supervillain. We all have these traits to some degree.
So it's not like everyone who's ever craved a promotion has a little bit of psychopath in them. That's reassuring.
The dark triad measures these darker aspects of personality that we all possess to some extent.
Yeah.
But when those traits are extreme, things can get interesting.
So let's break it down, starting with narcissism. We've all met a narcissist or two. But what makes them tick when it comes to status?
When we talk about narcissism in the context of the dark triad, we're usually referring to what's called grandiose narcissism. These are the folks with those larger-than-life personalities. They might be charming and charismatic, but they're also convinced of their own brilliance and crave constant admiration.
Okay, so they're like that chocolate cake that seems irresistible at first, but after a while you just feel sick.
They might make a great first impression, but over time that self-centeredness and need for validation can be exhausting for everyone else.
And what about Machiavellianism? That one sounds straight up like something out of a political thriller.
Think of it less House of Cards and more about strategic manipulation. These are the people who are always thinking a few steps ahead, willing to bend the rules and exploit others to get what they want. They're all about leverage and knowing the right buttons to push.
Do these master manipulators get ahead? Or do they eventually trip themselves up?
That's the thing about Machiavellianism. It can be effective in the short term, but it's not a sustainable long-term strategy. Those who rely too heavily on manipulation often burn bridges and create enemies along the way.
So it's like that saying, you can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time.
Precisely. High Machiavellianism, coupled with high intelligence, can be a potent combination for success. However, those who are high in Machiavellianism but lack the smarts often end up sabotaging themselves.
So you need the brains to back up the bravado. Otherwise, it's just a matter of time before the house collapses.
Exactly. Now let's move on to the most extreme of the dark triad traits, psychopathy. This one is characterized by a lack of empathy, disregard for others, and a tendency toward impulsive, often risky behavior.
Okay, that one definitely has supervillain origin story vibes.
Psychopathy is actually the least likely of the dark triad traits to be associated with long-term status or success. Why? Because that impulsivity often leads to their downfall. They might crave status and power, but their inability to play the long game, their disregard for consequences, often catches up with them.
A little bit of ambition and risk-taking can be good, but going full-blown rogue usually backfires.
Now, you might be thinking back to that statistic we mentioned earlier about 13% of executives exhibiting clinical levels of psychopathy.
But you're saying it's not as simple as saying all CEOs are psychopaths.
It's important to remember that these are complex individuals operating within complex systems. While some people in positions of power might score higher on certain dark triad traits, it doesn't mean they're completely devoid of empathy or compassion in other areas of their lives. It's all a balancing act.
This whole conversation has me thinking about the arc of a career. Does our relationship with status change as we get older?
The research suggests that while older adults tend to have more status in terms of traditional markers like income and career achievements, younger adults are actually more preoccupied with climbing that ladder.
When you're starting out, you're hungry to prove yourself, make your mark on the world. Then as you get older, maybe those priorities shift a bit.
You have more experience, you've hopefully achieved some level of success, and your focus may shift towards other things like mentorship, legacy, or simply enjoying the fruits of your labor.
So that whole young and reckless phase isn't just a cliche. Our inner Machiavelli is running wild and then eventually says, all right, I need a nap.
And there's even a theory called the young male syndrome, which suggests that young men in particular are more likely to engage in risky and even criminal behavior during this peak dark triad phase.
If those darker impulses tend to fade with time, does that mean we're all destined to become saints in our old age?
There's a whole other side to this personality coin we haven't even touched on yet, the light triad.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this light triad.
While the dark triad focuses on the darker aspects of human nature, the light triad highlights the brighter side. These traits, humanism, Conscientism, and faith in humanity, represent the best of what it means to be human.
Conscientism, that sounds a bit intimidating. Could you break that down for me?
Imagine living by a code where you only act in ways that you'd be okay with everyone else acting. That's Conscientism in a nutshell. It's about integrity, universality, and treating others how you want to be treated.
So it's not that we lose our ambition or drive as we get older, but maybe it's tempered by a greater appreciation for collaboration, integrity, and generally being a decent human being.
Exactly. Studies show that scoring high on those light triad traits is correlated with greater happiness and well-being.
So being good really is its own reward.
But don't worry, you don't have to choose between success and being a good person. Research also suggests that people who exhibit light triad traits can be just as successful, if not more, than those who lean towards the dark triad.
That's good news because honestly, this whole conversation has been a roller coaster. I'm feeling reassured that maybe, just maybe, we're not all doomed to become power-hungry Machiavellian robots in pursuit of status.
Me too.
It's comforting to think that we can climb that ladder of success without sacrificing our souls in the process. It's not just about reaching the top, but about how we choose to make that climb. To all our listeners out there, keep striving, keep dreaming, but most importantly, keep being kind. You never know who might be watching and learning from your example.
I think we've given our listeners plenty to ponder today.
We take those burning questions, those everyday mysteries, and we unpack them together.
And hopefully leave our listeners with insights.
Always. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing, and remember, the pursuit of status doesn't have to be a race to the bottom. Choose kindness, choose integrity, and choose to make a difference. You might just find that true status finds you right back.